Bill Mitchell, how are you, sir?
Good to see you, Matt.
Good to see you too. God, I'm pumped about this conversation. You and I got connected because I had a conversation with Senator Wintrow, who was talking about add the words as well as gay marriage and employment discrimination. And she told me in this conversation, which blew me away, she's like, you can be fired today in Idaho if you're gay.
That's
and I was
right.
like, that seems bonkers, right? And I put that clip out and immediately people said two things. So like first, Title VII protects against that. And I asked her specifically, are there federal constraints? She said, right now you can be fired. And then the other thing people said was right to work state. And I was like, wow, I don't know anything about this. So I started reaching out to attorneys. I got connected with you. You agreed to come in to explain this. So let's just start with employment. Can, in the state of Idaho right now, someone be fired for no other reason than the fact that they're gay?
Yeah, for no other reason or no reason. Yeah. Idaho is pretty tough. There was an effort that began 10 years ago known as Add the Words. At the time, I was a city council member in Garden City, and we tried to add those words to the city code, and we just couldn't get it on the agenda. Most city leaders felt that this was a statewide issue, that it should come through the legislature. So it did, and it got a hearing exactly once in 10 years, a hearing. So this tomorrow actually is the anniversary, the 10-year anniversary of the Add the Words movement in Idaho. We still don't have it. Sexual orientation or gender identity are not protected characteristics in Idaho.
Okay, so what are protected characteristics? Because people come up with a lot of things. Like, I think it's just hard to understand. So you, for instance, you can fire people for a lot of things in Idaho. You could not fire them because they're black, right?
That's right. Race is a protected characteristic.
Right. You could not fire them because they're a woman.
Gender is also a protected characteristic.
Right. So when people say you can get fired for anything, you can't fire me because I'm black, or if I were black. Mm-hmm. You can't fire me if I was a woman, right? You could fire me because you don't like my hair, right? But that's different than you're black.
Right. Yeah. Your hair is not a protected characteristic. That's what I would call no reason at all. Right. Okay. So most employment settings are known as at-will employment settings. You could lose your job. You could be denied employment or lose your job for no reason at all.
Okay.
The trouble comes when there is a reason. Sometimes it's a hidden reason, a pernicious reason, something that an employee may know is the cause for them not getting the job or losing the job. And we have to look closely at that to see whether they have any recourse at all. In some situations, they do. So if you look at a union shop, for example, there may be a collective bargaining agreement that adds some additional protections. By and large, though, in Idaho, sexual orientation and gender identity are not protected characteristics, and you could lose your job just for a perception that you are gay or lesbian or trans.
Okay. Now, with protected items, let's say I'm black. Okay. I'm working with somebody. It's not a union shop. All I have is the at-will employment, characteristics. All right. And you are my employer. You fire me because I'm black. Now you say, hey, I can fire you for any reason, and I'm firing you. You're fired. You don't give a reason. You just say I'm fired. I feel like you're firing me because I'm black. Mm-hmm. So I file a complaint with somebody, or I, bring this up to some representation, say, hey, I think I got discriminated against because I'm black. Mm-hmm. And I understand that this is an at-will employment state, but he can't fire me because I'm black. Yep. You say, yeah, or you as the employer then get notification and they say, hey, this person thinks you fired them because they're black. Mm-hmm. You cannot do that. And you have to then come forward and say, I fired him for this other reason, and then prove that that was the actual reason you fired me.
And so your obligation then as the employee who I fired is to go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, file a grievance, a statement, alleging that you lost your job for these unlawful reasons.
Right.
You'd offer some evidence, and if you passed a threshold that tended to show that may be true, an investigation would be initiated against me and the employer that I represented to see if there are other
explanations or whatever it might be.
Or if there's other evidence that might support the statement that you were discharged for an unlawful reason. Like, are there any other black people that I employ? How many people that I've fired in the past have been racial minorities? Do I have a presence on social media that tends to suggest that I am a racist person or that I have prejudices that would have led me to make that decision? So there's a lot of ways that you can get to what was my motivation.
Got it. Okay. And that's an example of, hey, yeah, we have at-will employment, but you cannot deny employment or fire somebody based on protected classes. So the whole nonsense of you can get fired for any reason, that's not actually true. You can't get fired for an illegal or protected class reason.
That's right.
Okay.
And that applies in most employment situations. But there are some situations in Idaho where if you're perceived to be gay, lesbian, trans, you may not get that job. And right now, our Human Rights Act does not cover sexual orientation or gender identity.
Okay. So this is where Title VII comes in, because I found out in digging around in this that Title VII, which is a federal law, does protect sexual orientation and gender identity at a certain level, meaning that once an organization gets large enough, it falls under the Title VII protection. But underneath that threshold, and I think it's around 15 employees, underneath that threshold. So if I'm working for somebody that has just 10 employees, a corporation that has 10 employees, or an employer that only has 10 employees, they do not fall under the protection of the Title VII. They fall under the Idaho Human Rights Act.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And, many employers, as we were talking before the show, believe that it's proper to protect members of the LGBTQ community anyways, even if the law doesn't tell them that they have to.
Sure.
A lot of people, it's 2025. It's contemporary. It's, people understand the equity of that, but they're not required to. And so there's a movement, a 10-year-old movement, as I was mentioning, known as Add the Words. We have a big anniversary coming up tomorrow, which is the 10-year anniversary of the very first time we tried to get a statewide Human Rights Act amendment passed in the state legislature. It didn't pass, obviously. And so we're just trying to add sexual orientation and gender identity to those protections.
Okay. Now, again, that's Title VII, which only applies to a large threshold or a population threshold within a corporation. The at-will also doesn't have a protection, right? And the at-will does have protections for protected classes, to be clear. And then finally, the other thing people brought up were right to work. They're like, we're a right to work state, but this only applies when you're dealing with a union represented outfit.
Right. The idea of right to work is best described as you don't have to join the union. If you're a union shop, you don't have to join the union in order to work in the union shop. And the great thing about collective bargaining is that you end up with an agreement between the workforce and the management that may customize your workplace protections in ways that the law can't really cover you or hasn't really thought about how to cover you yet. And that may involve things as mundane as time off or, the company you get your health insurance through, or it might include discriminatory practices like sexual orientation and gender identity. So right to work is really just about a union shop and whether you have to be a member of that union. Really, we're talking about the at-will employment nature of most employment settings in Idaho.
Gotcha. And bottom line is, that argument or defense or position rather is dead on arrival if you're not dealing with a company that's, union representation. Like right. If you're just dealing with an average, everyday person who has let's say 10 employees and no union employees or no union shop there, then it's like the fact that it's a right to work state is meaningless.
That's right.
Okay.
I would say the only other exception to that might be if as an employee you have somehow been able to strike an employment agreement with your employer. Not that common, but sometimes it happens. Like I'll come to work for you for 10 years at this, rate of pay. And these are my workplace expectations in that job. You don't see that too often, but sometimes you do, especially when maybe someone was recruited from out of the area to fill a specialty type profession. You might end up with an employment agreement where some additional protections are offered within the scope of the agreement. Rare, though.
Gotcha. That's a lot. There's a lot going on here. One thing that people did bring up that I found interesting is they were saying, hey, look, if you're just a normal employee, there's no need for your, let's say sexual orientation to even become a thing Like, don't be making out with your partner at work. And I thought about that. I was like, yeah, okay. Like I can see where people are coming from. But then other people very quickly said, hey, look, does your company have like a Christmas party? Do they invite, like you and your family? Like what if I show up and I'm gay and I show up with my partner? It's like, oh, what are you guys, friends? No, this is like my husband or this is my boyfriend or whatever. Do you have to hide? Like, do you have to use the ambiguous, like, well, partner wouldn't even work. And they're like, what are you in partner in business for?
Right,
yeah.
Right.
There was that hilarious scene from, I don't know if it's hilarious, but that scene from American Beauty when the super conservative guy moves into or whatever it is, they were living there. And the guy comes over and is like, oh, this is me and my partner. He's like, what are you guys selling? Yeah. They're like, no, it's just, it's just, we're part. Kevin Spacey. That's before Kevin Spacey fell from grace.
But what about this, Matt? What if you're an employee and you're somebody who might be described as gender nonconforming, non-binary? All right. So let's say you groom yourself in a way that may be ambiguous as to your gender assigned at birth. Let's say you're what we would call a cisgendered man, right? Like you are somebody who looks like
I'm a biological man and I dress and act as a biological man.
Okay. Let's suppose you like to polish your fingernails or wear makeup on your face that highlighted, certain features of your face. And you went to that employer Christmas party wearing the clothes and the grooming that you prefer in your off-duty hours. Now, you might not be someone who identifies as gay, but you like to be gender nonconforming when you're not at work. Now, how about that?
Eddie Izzard.
Like Eddie Izzard.
There we go. I was searching for that. He had the bits about being like an executive trans guy. And he had this whole bit about when he was growing up, he liked to put on makeup and he would like hide it in his tree fort. And he went up to his tree fort one day and there was a squirrel like putting on makeup. He was like, what? Fuck you. Like Eddie Izzard just nailed. His like 2002 comedy special just destroyed it. Really interesting guy.
He really is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. I get what you're saying. And presumably, well, we don't have to go into like whether you'd be on the clock or off the clock at a Christmas party. The bottom line is, I think a lot of people could understand, like if you have a picture of your family on your desk and it was like two gay guys, like that's not you putting it in people's faces. It's not an unreasonable thing for somebody to expect a loved one to be in a picture or like an emergency contact. What's your relationship? My husband or like my wife, whatever it is.
Exactly.
So there are aspects of just normal happenings within a workplace that are not offensive or, putting it in people's faces where you could find out like, oh, this person happens to be gay.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, that's a bit of a trip. So bottom line is in other states, about half of the country, the people's sexual orientation or gender identity it does qualify them as a protected class and does, outside of Title VII, of course, and does prevent people from being fired exclusively for these reasons. Idaho is not one of them.
That's right.
Right. And whereas we do have the existence of protected classes, we do acknowledge in Idaho today, there are things you cannot be fired for legally. Being gay is not one of them.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, in Idaho, there are a couple municipalities that went that extra distance to add sexual orientation and gender identity to their municipal ordinances.
Interesting.
Meridian is one of them.
Oh.
Pocatello is one of them. Moscow is one of them. They're a handful. And there was a time when several cities in a row were passing municipal ordinances to protect sexual orientation and gender identity, but then it suddenly stopped. It just lost momentum. And in fact, last year there was a race in Meridian, and one of the issues that came up in the race was supporting the repeal of Meridian's ordinance that protected for sexual orientation and gender identity.
Was this like a city council race?
Yeah, city council race. Exactly right.
Okay, who was hammering for repealing it?
Oh, you're testing my memory now. Yeah, I can't.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. But the point is that locally people have enacted these things and it has become, at least in some places, a target for like, let's get rid of this, whatever it might be.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I've been wanting to get the Meridian mayor on. Maybe I'll have him on.
Perfect.
Maybe he won't want to talk about this. I have no idea what his, campaign or election, cycle is. Anyway, doesn't matter. Bottom line is that's where we are with employment. You're not protected by right to work, or the right to work does not allow you to fire somebody for a protected class. It's the at will employment does have to observe protected classes. Sexual orientation is not one of them. And then Title VII does not come to your rescue.
Right.
Wow. Okay. I'm so glad we flushed that out, because I was confused, and then people were like, that's not true. But now we have the answer. Today, also, as I found out right before you got here, the passed in the Idaho House of Representatives, there was the initiative to ask the federal government to repeal the same-sex marriage law that allows people to be recognized as married in the United States.
That's right.
Okay, help me understand that one.
Okay.
Now, this is not a law that Idaho passed. This was not legislation. This was essentially the Idaho state political apparatus saying, hey, and again, just one section of it saying, we're passing this, and we would like, if the Senate passes as well, then like an email goes to the federal government essentially saying, hey guys, please ditch the same-sex marriage.
Yeah, and not just to the federal government. It's intended as a direct communication to the U.S. Supreme Court, asking that court to review and reverse itself on a 2015 decision known as Obergefell versus Hodges. It's rare for the court to reverse itself. It has happened, and we could almost argue that Roe versus Wade was reversed after 50 years when Dobbs issued. It's hard to imagine that a 10-year-old decision would be reviewed and reversed by the Supreme Court, even more so on something that looked like a joint memorial from the legislature of the state of Idaho. The Supreme Court is only going to review a case that comes up on appeal, and if it has good questions that are presented for the Supreme Court, and this isn't it.
Okay, so the bottom line is this is essentially a commentary to the federal government and the Supreme Court, if it passes the Senate as well, saying, hey, we would like you to review this and check it out. But obviously, in any substantial review that would warrant a Supreme Court, revisiting this, I assume you'd have to bring, like additional information, or is it just like, hey, look at the exact same facts you had before and see if you would like to reinterpret it?
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And, if we look at what happened in 2015, there was kind of a quickening of cases just like Obergefell that were coming forward. The Supreme Court picked the one that they thought was the best one to encapsulate all the issues in one case.
Come back to the mic, my guy.
Sorry. How about this?
Oh, it's fantastic.
Right,
okay,
good.
Yeah.
So they picked this case in 2015. In fact, there was one that arose in Idaho. It could have been the Idaho case just as well, but they picked Obergefell. And the only thing different from 2015 to 2025 is that we have a handful of new Supreme Court justices. And I think that this memorial that came forward in the Idaho House of Representatives is intended to tempt those couple of new justices to have another look. If you had been sitting on the court in 2015, how would you have ruled, is what I think it's intended to do. Very rare for the court to take up a decision it's made and reverts itself, but it did happen. It happened in a case known as Trump versus Hawaii just a couple years ago. And a lot of people in Idaho know about the tragedy, the ugly decision by the Roosevelt administration to put Japanese people of Japanese ancestry in internment camps, or concentration camps, as we called them in Germany during World War II. We call them internment camps because it's a better word, I guess, but they were concentration camps. And there was a Supreme Court case that came forward known as Korematsu, which landed on the wrong side, that said that it was okay in a time of war to issue an executive order like that to put people of Japanese ancestry in concentration camps. But in Trump versus Hawaii, which had nothing to do with Korematsu, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said, kind of out of the blue, let's just have it out right now. Korematsu was wrong then, and it's wrong now. As far as anyone needs to know, it's overturned right here and now. And it was totally unrelated to the case. It would be very hard to imagine Chief Justice Roberts doing something like that with Obergefell. Technically, is it possible? I guess, but I think that in that case, he would need to have the majority of the court behind him on it.
Gotcha. So a lot of things happening.
Yes.
A lot of things happening. That I really appreciate you explaining all this, because there is no way in God's green earth that I was going to get to this level of stuff ever and have any confidence in my arrival. So I really appreciate you. Is there anything that we've missed?
Yeah, let's look at one other case. Have you ever heard of Loving versus Virginia?
Have not.
That was a really interesting case from 1967. And the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1967 said that a white man couldn't marry a black woman. There were laws back in 1967 that said that people of different races couldn't get married, that it was against public policy, that it violated goals of the state of Commonwealth of Virginia. That decision went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. That case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, no, you can't regulate marriage based on race, even though marriage is something that traditionally the states have full purview to regulate. You can't regulate marriage in such a way that violates a protected characteristic on something as fundamental as marriage. That is the same framework that Obergefell was decided upon. So to hear the sponsors of the Idaho House Memorial explain it, they say that it's a states' rights issue, that it should be up to the state of Idaho to regulate marriage the way the state of Idaho sees fit. And that is true. Under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, it says that, there are a handful of subjects that are traditionally the purview of the states. Marriage is one of them. And so the state of Idaho can indeed regulate marriage. But a states' rights argument would end right there, but that's not the end of the story. We still have to look at, does the regulation of marriage violate fundamental aspects of equal protection? Does it violate the right of people of the same sex to have the right that people of different sexes have? And in Obergefell, they decided, it did violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The exact same framework that got us Loving versus Virginia, that said that people of different races can marry, is the same legal argument that said that people of the same sex can be allowed to marry.
Can I ask you something?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very ignorant on this. I remember the debate raging in my former state of California over, I can't remember what all the different props were, right?
8. Yep.
There it is. And that was like 2010 or something as well, right?
That's right.
I remember hearing all of these things, and there was some carve out for like domestic partnerships at the, when I was ending college, that was a thing. And I remember asking my brother, like, who I asked about these things a lot. And I was like, can there just be like a different, like, what are the rights that people want? Like, if people are so worried about marriage, okay, and like, fine, you're worried about marriage, the word marriage, you only want to be man, woman, that's fine. And this is me at like 26, 27, like, can we just make like marriage 2.0 and like say, okay, marriage 1.0 is man and woman, but marriage 2.0 can be a man and man or a woman and a woman. And these function essentially the exact same ways from a legal precedent. We just have different words for them and make everybody happy. Like, is there something, and I don't know anything about it, but like, is that something that could just be done? Like, okay, we're going to make domestic partners exact same value from a legal standpoint, standing from a legal standpoint as, marriage, but we just call them domestic partners, and domestic partners can be of the same gender. And then marriage has to be, again, exact same standing. You don't like lose any rights. You don't gain any rights. You're just a man and a woman. Like, can we just do that and make everybody happy? Is that a thing that would work?
Well, we tried something like that where we sent white kids to this school with the same curriculum that this school had, but they taught all the black kids.
I think that's a little different.
How's it different?
That you physically segregate people.
Yeah, but so that is the fallacy, that the separate schools are not equal. They will always be different because they're not the same school. The same is true for the marriage regime that you just outlined. If marriage 1.0 is for heterosexual couples and marriage 2.0 is for same-sex couples, it's not the same thing. So advocates for marriage equality want to have the exact same institution. They don't want to have any kind of feeling that marriage 2.0 is different from 1.0, the original marriage. And that's exactly how the debate would devolve. It would be seen as you're not part of the pure form of marriage, you're marriage 2.0. That's the one for the gays.
I get what you're saying. I understand segregation's bad. Understand. I can't wrap my head. It's like, okay, so bottom line is this is a fight over a word because it's not function.
No, it's definitely function too. I mean,
no, but what I'm saying is if you're saying, hey, we could give the exact same rights and privileges to the domestic partners as we do to the married couples, but the domestic partners want to be called married.
Well, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. That's what I'm saying. So it's not a fight over function necessarily as much as it's a fight over, no, I want that word.
Well, what about, the 1,500 or so benefits that come to couples who are married?
Yeah, give them all to the domestic partner people.
Okay.
Sign the legal document, make sure that like you get all the same rights. You get the right of survivorship. You go on deeds and titles the same. Your emergency contact, they make everything the same. Just make one group domestic partner and one group married, give them everything the same. And if we get everything the same, then it's like, well, no, we want that word. I want, like, there's such a fight over words these days. It's like, it's wild to me. Like, I had no idea that words were this intense. It was like, functionally, we can all engage in the world. They're like, no, I want it. Give me the word.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it just comes down to, equal protection under the law is really the thing. And same-sex couples want to have that same equal protection, the same word. They want to be seen on the same footing as anyone else in the room.
Yeah, but Bill, what if we could give them the same protection with just a different word?
I really think you're going to hear the community tell you it's not the same.
And look, that's fine. I'm just trying to understand, like, what is it? And if you're like, listen, I will never feel accepted, or I will never feel the same, or I never feel that the law looks at me the exact same if I'm a domestic partner versus married. Okay. Like, if that's how people feel, 100%. I'm just trying to understand that it's like, no, it's not just about the same protection. It's about, hey, we will never be seen the same or viewed the same, and that doesn't feel good to us.
100%. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it.
Bill, I think we, I don't know if we solved anything today, but at least we got some clarity, which I appreciate. Thank you for making the time today. I know you're, everybody I feel so privileged. People take time out of their workday to come yap at me.
Oh, no, it's so important, I think, for the kind of communication that you foster here in your studio it just doesn't exist anywhere else. We were chatting a little bit before we met about how even in the committee rooms at the legislature, the true story, the full story can't come out because the supermajority in the legislature just won't have it.
Well, again, I think it's even if we had a balanced legislature, our system of politics and governance is not designed for the whole story. It's always designed for like, you get 2 minutes that's it. And so you're going to get this reductionist, bastardized version of a human story that will never yield understanding. And plus it's exceptionally hard to hear. Like you have to either be in the room or suffer through terrible audio and video. Like
that's right. There was a great editorial opinion by, can we mention another news media?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. The Idaho Statesman had a great editorial opinion. Scott McIntosh said this. He said, I have a great idea. I've long held this idea that we could shorten the state legislative session easily by half if we just do what we're already headed toward, which is eliminate committee hearings. The committee members vote the way they want to anyways, regardless of the input from members of the public. So why not just forego that formality and let committee members vote the way they want to going into the session on every bill that comes forward. I know he's being facetious, but he makes a great point. Right. When you go through a committee and you have, 100% opposition to a bill and it's voted yes with a do pass recommendation to the full House, that is the flawed system. It's a farce is what it is. And so, people are finally realizing that it doesn't do any good to engage the legislature this way. And we do have a broken system.
Well, at the risk of sounding incredibly arrogant, I do feel like this type of conversation is part of the solution, which is, hey, let's engage in good faith, not 2-minute, detailed analysis of what's going on. I'm not trying to solve it. I definitely can. I'm an idiot. You bring great perspectives, and then the people get to decide. And there will be, if we can produce a more educated populace, we will produce better elected officials. And
I think you're right. I really think you're right. And the irony is that most Idahoans probably see the world as a much more equitable place than our legislature does. And the legislature, unfortunately, is a hyper condensed version of the broader electorate. And I think that if it were more reflective of how people feel in their hearts, we wouldn't be seeing the super hardcore bills coming forward every session.
On that note, my guy, thank you for coming, sir. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
you.
Thank you, Todd.